Hey everybody, I want to welcome you to some sewing. We are going to be doing a really quick and easy sewing pattern. My name is Emily and I love easy sewing patterns because I happen to be a crafter that kind of dabbles in a lot of different things. Sometimes I sew, sometimes I paint, sometimes I doodle. Actually, I doodle every day. But I love easy sewing patterns because A, I can always get my kids involved because my daughter is very interested in sewing and learning the sewing machine, and B, I'm a very instant gratification, instant satisfaction kind of crafter. So maybe you're like me and this pattern will be super awesome for you. All of the notes for this pattern are available in a PDF, and that is available in the link in the description for you to download. But I also want to point out that we have a chat box going, and I'm going to check in on that chat box. I would love for you to pop in any questions you have or any ideas you have, because I really love when we're able to get this community together and kind of be a one crafting, making community, and we can kind of pop ideas back and forth to each other. Because I am always the kind of crafter that says, just because I do it one way doesn't mean that there's not another better way to do it. So I love hearing from you. I also love hearing where you are. And this craft actually happens to be kind of like spring Easter inspired. So if you're feeling in the springy mood, or if you're feeling in the it's almost Easter time mood, I would love to hear what you're making or how you're celebrating, or just kind of generally what is inspiring you this spring season. So pop that in the comments, or any questions you have. Pop that in the comments because I'd love to hear from you. So this pattern that I made, I just want to show this to you. We use fabric napkins in our house all the time because, quite frankly, I was just talking with some friends that it feels so frivolous to buy things you're just going to throw away, like napkins and toilet paper and paper towels. And while I know they're necessary in life, this feels like an easy solution to kind of cut that waste or cut that cost. And maybe you're like, nope, I will never use that. That's okay too, because this pattern is easily adaptable to a placemat or a table runner, just with the concept that we're gonna do to make it kind of like self-binding or self kind of finishing along the edge. So still follow along even if you're not a fabric napkin person, because I wanna show you actually just how simple these are. It's literally just two rectangles, straight stitches, and kind of some side angles. So if you see, this is just one of them I opened. And I picked a floral motif because I did want these to be spring inspired and potentially use them for Easter table decor. But all this is two pieces of fabric, a bigger piece of fabric with a smaller piece of fabric, and they have some nice kind of beveled edge details. And if you look super closely, my beveled edges aren't perfect, and I want to give you the freedom to not make yours perfect either, but they're a really quick sew. And they're even quicker if you want to make a handful of them by kind of like cutting and factory cutting and, you know, kind of mass producing by cutting all the middle rectangles out first and then all the bigger rectangles out second, and just kind of, you know, doing each step kind of together. So they're very fast. I want to show you how to do them. They come together in one of those kind of trust the process patterns, because halfway through you'll go, oh my gosh, this is not working. And as a matter of fact, in my brain when I was making this, I could like visualize what I was doing, and I couldn't get it to work because I was like, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right. And lo and behold, it was right the whole time, but it doesn't look right as we're doing it. So again, all of the pattern, actual step-by-step instructions, along with all the cutting notes, everything with detailed photos is in the PDF, which is that link that's in the description for you to download. Oh, Linda's from Ontario, Canada. Hi, Linda. It's very warm up here in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Midwest area. So I hope it's warm where you are too. Unseasonably warm. Okay, so I actually pre-cut out some fabrics here because I just did that. So I have, and it's in the notes as well, that the trim and the backing is the same fabric. So in this case, I have pink. And then the front is going to be this kind of floral. And I actually did this. Isn't this so funny when you make two pieces out of the same, or two things, similar things out of the same fabric? This fabric looks so much more orangey when it has that orange trim versus when it has the pink trim. I always think that's so fun to play with fabrics. I chose solids for my sides and my backing just because I feel like I love, it's like it adds a frame around the picture. So your back, which will also become your trim, is 16 by 16, and then your front, which is the front or this smaller size, will be 12 by 12. So you can enlarge it or make it smaller. The math, I'm just gonna like give you 2 seconds of the snippet of the math. It is 4 inches bigger So it's 2 inches bigger on both sides, right? If that makes sense, which means it gives me just over an inch of an edge. That was kind of the math I did. And in my brain, I thought, okay, 2 inches would be right, but 12 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 16, if that makes any sense. So if you want to make a placemat, just make sure that you have 4 inches bigger on both sides to get an inch border or an inch edge or an inch hem, if that's whatever you want to call it. And you can adjust that math accordingly, but that was my thought process with that. So the first step is to mark the middles of both of your fabrics. You can do this with an iron, you can do this with your fingers. I like to use the heat of my fingers because I feel like it works really well. So I'm going to just simply fold my fabrics in half. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but I want to find the middles because I'm going to match up my middles to kind of center this in the bigger fabric. And you can use an iron if this works, but I'm just using the heat of my hand and kind of pinching, pressing right here. And all I need is just, it's probably super hard to see, but I can see it. Just that little crease lengthwise and widthwise so that I can identify where the middle of my fabrics are. It's maybe easier to see on the back. I don't know if you can see that little crease, but just use the heat of your fingers or an iron. You could use a pin. I just don't love pinning. That sounds very lame of me. I don't love pinning because I feel like you always just take the pins right back out. For a step like this, I will pin eventually, but for a step like this, I don't love it because I feel like I can never make them precise. So I see my 1, 2, 3, 4 creases, and I'm going to do the same thing to my backing or my edging, whatever you want to call it. I think in the pattern I reference this piece of fabric as the backing fabric. Just using the heat of my hand and pushing. Maybe this means you should really have a good hot cup of coffee before you sew, or maybe you should have a hot cup of coffee so your hands are nice and warm as you keep sewing. Okay. Oh, that's funny because that was on a crease. I should have maybe noticed that. We have a few more people joining in the chat. Kat from Longview, Washington. I really love to hear people's spring. I feel like spring is one of those seasons where you make a lot. At least I make a lot because I just get like, after Christmas, when you're making a ton of gifts, it feels like I get back into the making mood when the weather starts getting warmer with bright colored fabrics and great paint colors. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, which you kind of maybe can see. I don't know if you can see that. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm going to do, my solid is just a solid, so there's no right or wrong side, but you are going to do right sides together, and this is where it kind of starts to beginning of the trust the process. So I'm going to grab 4 pins, all of which that are straight, and some of these are a little bit crooked, so let's get rid of those. And I'm simply just going to match up where those creases are, and do your very best. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try your best, and then just stick a pin there. So this is one side, and then this is where it's going to pucker a little bit. So I'm going to match up my crease with my crease on this side. See, you're kind of centering it in the center of the, centering the small square in the center of the big square, which means you'll have a lot of extra fabric because it's 4 inches difference in dimension. So match this up, and then this side as well. Oops, where's that? There we go. Ta-da! So, the next step is, I wanted to tell you 2 things. One, we're going to sew our edges, and it's going to be weird, but we're going to kind of move the background fabric around and out of the way. 2, make sure, this is the step I always forget when I'm making a pattern like this, make sure to leave an opening because you want to flip your napkin right side out at some point. I always forget that part, and then I end up like having to take something out, so just keep that in mind. And perhaps I will do the same thing right now. I don't know. Sometimes I get so into making. So what I do to remember myself, to remind myself to give myself an opening is I usually try, now watch, I'm gonna forget, but grab 2 different colored pins. So I'm just gonna use red so that I remember to start and stop and leave an opening and I'm just going to pin, it seems to me that leaving an opening is the easiest on a straight side. So I'm gonna just pick the middle of the straight side, one straight side right here, and I'm gonna put my 2 red pins, matching up my edges, right here, in hopes that I remember not to sew that part. But essentially we're going to sew each straight stitch along the edge, leaving 1/4 of an inch on each of the sides. Here's what you could do, and this is maybe you have a magic solution that you want to give to me that I just don't have right now, but if you feel like you have a way, this is what I was trying to do when I was figuring out this pattern, so maybe you have a secret solution that you can tell me. If you have a way that you can stitch all the way around the edge without creasing the corner, fill me in, because I tried for no less than a gazillion hours and couldn't make it work. And maybe there is no solution because it's so big, like the background is so big, but maybe you have a solution. Either way, I'm going to pin my edges flush to each other, knowing that I'm going to straight stitch, leaving 1/4 of an inch on each side, which would in theory be the seam allowance. So it's gonna be weird because you're gonna end up with these floppy corners. And that's how you know you're doing it right, is if you have these the excess fabric ends in the corners, I guess is maybe how I should word it. And if you don't want to pin, you don't have to pin. You can wing it and just see how it works. I would recommend pinning. Oh my word, we have somebody from Egypt and South Africa. Wow, this feels very important. I love that you're here. Maybe there's other spring or Easter traditions that you have in other countries. I would love to hear about that. These feel like very simple napkins that maybe could translate to other family gatherings. Okay, see how I said that the excess will be in the corners? That's how we want it to look. So I'm probably adding far too many pins, but you know, just make sure that it's great. So again, I know I just said this, but we are gonna do a straight stitch on all 4 sides, leaving an opening in the middle where it will be turned, and leaving the 1/4 inch seam allowance in the corners. And the reason is you don't want to overlap or pucker this fabric. We want to leave this sort of like flower petal looking excess in the corner right there. So I will go over to my sewing machine. I'm gonna pull it in just a little bit here. And I'm going to start on the side that doesn't have the opening just to get myself going here. And leaving 1/4 of an inch for my seam allowance, I'm just going to straight stitch right along the edge. Or here, let me just say this. It doesn't even have to be 1/4 of an inch. You can pick whatever seam allowance you want. It could be 1/2 an inch, 1/8 of an inch, whatever it is, as long as it's the same across the entire fabric napkin and it's the same in the corners. I feel like 1/4 of an inch is my go-to simply because it's nice and sturdy and strong and great. And if you want to backstitch in the corners, you can. My sewing machine is on really slow stitching because my daughter used it last. And I'll just remove my pins as I go. I hate sewing over pins. I would recommend not doing that. I've broken more needles than I can ever tell you by sewing over pins. And some people swear by it and I can't get it to work. Okay, so as I'm coming to the edge, it might be a little hard to see, but as I'm coming to the edge, I want to make sure that my edge remains flush along the edge and I keep that excess fabric in the corners. And I'm just going to stop and then cut. This is kind of a simple pattern because I love that it's just straight stitches. See, straight stitch, right along the side. I'm leaving my fabric in the corners. So now when I go to this other side, I'm simply going to spin it and then move the fabric so it's out of the way because I don't want to pucker my corners. I want to leave those flat because we want them to be able to turn right side out and be that nice, cool beveled edge. And you'll see, okay, here's how I know I did this right. If I'm lining up my 1/4 of an inch on my sewing machine, it basically comes to where my last seam of my 1/4 of an inch ended. If you have a little bit of a space, it's not gonna be that big of a deal, honestly, because you will end up beveling that edge and top stitching over it anyway. Straight stitch. Pulled my pin out too soon. There we go. And just make sure everything is lining up. You can go as slow as fast as you want. And if you are mass producing these and making a handful at a time, it's so great because you can kind of just see everything come together in the same steps. All right, these pins are done. And then I'm on to my next side. So I'm moving my fabric, pivoting my whole napkin, moving my fabric so that it's nice and flush, leaving all my fabric in the corners. This is, again, trust your process because this feels wrong, but I promise you it's right. Promise you it's right. Pinky swear. I always feel like I'm reminding my daughter when she's sewing, and this is just a good time to remind you, to never pull your fabric in the back as you're sewing, especially with a project like this, because you'll screw your tension up, and tension is kind of like how tight or loose the fabric is, kind of with how the needle and the thread go through the fabric, and you don't want to offset what you're doing so that it won't lay correctly. You want your machine to do the work for you. Whoa. Okay, there we go. Nice and close. So I'm to the point, I'm to my edge where I have my opening. This is where I have to remind myself that I want to keep the opening. So I have my 2 red pins, and I'm not going to sew between my 2 red pins. So I'm just going to start, stop, pick up, start, stop, because I want to leave that opening. And we'll top stitch it closed in the end. It's just so we can turn it right side out. Okay, I'm going to check in on these comments super fast. Sewing. Oh yes, everybody is sewing. Holy moly. I'm loving all these sewing projects that people are talking about. This is fun. Ronald likes to fix machines and collect them. I feel like we all love you because you are the kind of person that inspires us to be able to troubleshoot, inspires me to be able to troubleshoot when something goes wrong in my machine. That's pretty awesome. Okay. Stopping, because I will forget if I don't say it out loud. Cut. And then I'm just gonna go straight across. Same seam allowance. It doesn't even need to be that big of an opening. I may be leaving it too big, but I want to just be able to turn it right side out pretty easily. Oop. This last one, I always have to be a little careful because I want to make sure that it doesn't pull in the corner. Okay, so this is what it will look like. It'll look a little weird. It's really, you're gonna think this is wrong. This is the part of the process where I kept tearing out the fabric and putting it back together going, this isn't right, this isn't right. And you can kind of visualize, if you squish it flat, how this is gonna be. I wanna reference the pattern. So if you have the PDF download in this situation, I wanna show you, so this will be step, right here. We're on this. Nope, we're past this step. We are on step 4. I screwed this up the first like 5 times I did it because I did it backwards. And this is the only part of the process that matters to make sure you get your beveled edge as a correct beveled edge instead of a 3-dimensional side. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Because if you don't line up with your folded edge and you line up with your straight edge, it's gonna end up being a 3-dimensional side. I have the photos to show you, and I'm gonna show you 4 different times on my fabric so that you can see. It's not hard. I feel like I'm probably explaining it harder than it is. So I'm gonna move this stuff out of the way. Oh, super good question, Evelyn. You were asking how can these napkins be laundered and cared for? I throw them in, so here's a 2-second kind of process on how we do our napkins at our house. We have a, just like IKEA basket. It's just like a wire basket that's next to our sink. So when my kids are like, hopefully when my kids are clearing their dishes, they throw the napkin in that little basket, and like our towels and things go in there. And then every time I'm doing laundry, I just grab what's out of there and throw them in with the other laundry. I don't sort colors. I'm not that kind of laundry person. So perhaps you will say, this is a really bad idea and I need you to be doing your laundry better. That is a suggestion. I don't know. I just throw it in with everything. The one thing, and I should have maybe pointed this out at the very beginning, kind of fabric, like a little like 2-second fabric 101. If you have, a lot of people will tell you to pre-wash your fabric. And the reason you pre-wash your fabric is because it takes out all the sizing. And the sizing is, you know, when you get a article of clothing and you bring it home and it shrinks like a teeny bit, 10% I think is what they normally say. That's because it's getting out all the sizing. I don't even know what sizing is. I think it's like just to whatever. Your fabric is going to shrink a tiny bit. So if you use 2 pieces of fabric, one of them washed and one of them pre-washed and one of them not, your fabric is probably going to pull away from each other because one will shrink and the other won't, because one of them will already have been shrunk. I never pre-wash my fabric. That's just a choice I've made. Probably every quilter will say that is the worst idea in the world, and it kind of is, but it doesn't bother me, especially for napkins, because these ones, because they're just so simple, they just have the simple edging and the simple center. Even if they shrink and they end up not perfectly square when they're shrunk, I don't mind it, because it's just I don't know, it's a utility thing in our house, right? Like, so I throw them in with laundry. I don't pre-wash my fabric. You can, if you really want to, you can iron them as you go, as you're taking out clothes. I never iron anything in my house. The one thing about this pattern that I did that does work, and then I'll be done talking about this, is I've made other fabric napkin patterns before, and after you wash them like a bazillion times, they get really kind of crunchy, especially around the edges. The reason this pattern came to me is because adding this top stitch around the edge for the front and the back, which is kind of like a binding on a quilt, will hopefully alleviate, in my brain, that will alleviate the problem so that only this part can get a little like not flat if it absolutely has to, but the rest of the napkin won't. I don't know, maybe check in with me in 2 years and ask me how these fabric napkins are doing. We've used fabric napkins since my kids were super young, and now my kids are not super young anymore. And I love the process. I love that my kids can just throw them in the basket, and then I take that and it's just part of my laundry process. Yeah, this is also 100% cotton. So maybe if you're using something that's not 100% cotton, that might need a little bit more care. If you're making these for like a wedding and they have like a silk edging or something, that's probably a different story. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so this is the part that tripped me up a little bit. Here's what I mean by, I'm gonna pull this right to the center. What? And it shows in the photos right here, in the photos of the PDF download. But what you'll wanna do is you're gonna miter your corners, which means you're gonna put them at a 45-degree angle. I have this handy dandy ruler that has angles on it for me. I love that because I'm not really much of a math person, so this helps me. If you have a cutting board or cutting mat that has angles on it, or even if you have like one of these smaller ones, this will work. This has actually the written angles. We're going for a 45-degree angle because 45 and 45 make 90, which will be the corner of your napkin. If you don't have that, a straight edge, like a completely straight edge, like just a regular ruler will also do. You just have to be careful of kind of how it fits on the side. So here's what you're gonna do. Pull apart your 2 inside and outside. You're going to find each corner, right? Each extra corner by laying the corner, leave the bulk to the side, and you're laying the corner with the folded side up or the folded side away from you. And essentially, you're going to match up do the best you can, because it's a lot of extra fabric and it feels super janky and you're gonna go, this isn't working. What you're going to do is match up so that this is straight, your edge is straight, and your I don't know, fold. Now you can see, if you're really getting picky, I didn't sew this perfectly straight because my edge is not perfectly straight. So if you do not have a 45-degree angle mark, here's how you would do this, and it shows in the photos. You are going to line up the top edge. I'm going to use not this huge one. You are going to line up the top edge, so this top edge of your ruler or the top edge of your straight little ledge or something. You could use a cardboard box, I guess, if you really wanted to, with your fold right here. So this is flush with this, because what this is going to do is give you a great 45-degree angle when you sew it. You're going to want to match, I'm going to say this right, and hopefully ask questions if this feels confusing. The top edge is flush with your fold, and this edge you're going to scooch over so that it almost hits your, that it hits your seam allowance, but doesn't overlap with your floral, in my case, floral or your inside fabric. I'm going to say that one more time. You want to make your top of your ruler flush with the top of the fold and move your right side over so that it is almost flush or flush with your seam allowance, but does not overlap the inside fabric, because just visualize it for 2 seconds with me. If you overlap and you sew this fabric right here, this inside fabric, it's going to have a pucker on the edge. Well, there's a teeny pucker right here. It's going to have a pucker on the edge instead of lay flat. You don't want to pucker this inside fabric. You want it to lay flat. So all I'm going to do is take a marker, a pencil, pen, whatever you have. I have a mechanical pencil that I took from my kid's homework bucket, and I'm going to just draw where I will sew. That's all I'm going to do. Just draw where I'm going to sew. Do you see that line? It's probably kind of hard to see. I'm just going to draw where I'm going to sew. And you'll end up cutting off, if you look closely, this is a 90-degree angle and this is a 45-degree angle. So if I'm using my ruler, right, that has a 45-degree angle mark on it, I see that this is a 45-degree angle because it's going right on 45 degrees, and this is obviously 90 because it's making that 90-degree angle. That makes sense? Please ask questions if it doesn't, or refer to the PDF. I'm going to do all 4 of my corners. And this is an awesome question, Jill. You're asking, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the difficulty of this project? Like a 3, only because of these corners. It is not hard at all. And I say that with the full understanding that I am not a precise sewer. So for me, maybe it feels a little bit easier because I'm like, well, if the corners are a little puckered, it's okay because this is just a napkin and I'm just having fun sewing. I don't think this is a tricky project because it's all straight stitches, and the only thing that is tricky are these mitered corners, and I wouldn't even call them super tricky because you're able to use not even full, you don't even need like specific materials to make this happen. Holy moly, I keep moving this. That's my take on it. Because all we will do now is then just sew doot, 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 and it will end up being an awesome corner. Okay, wait, what did I just do? This one, I did that one already. This one, do this on all 4. Line this up, make the fold away from you. If the fold is towards you, your angle is not gonna be right. Your edge will not be right. I promise you 100%, pinky promise, it's not gonna be right. Because that is gonna make a boxy corner. I did it like 16 times and I'm like, this isn't working, and got frustrated and walked away from my sewing machine and then came back to it after I had a revelation in the shower going, I think I did that backwards. Okay. See this one, this is not perfectly square either, but I think there's room in sewing. I love sewing because it's instant, and it's also, like, in my opinion, doesn't have to be exactly perfect. If you're trying to make the most perfect quilt in the world with the best corners, then perhaps that is not, that is harder to, in my opinion, because it has to be all square and all right. Okay, so now all I'm gonna do is go back to my sewing machine and just stitch these corners. That's all I'm doing, straight stitch those corners. Doesn't matter, there's no seam allowance. You're stitching right on the line, making sure, again, that this edge is flush. So, stitch. Ta-da! Straight stitch right across. And you can tell, whoops, I have threads everywhere. Holy moly. I'm gonna clip that. Just so you can see. You can tell right here that my 1/4 inch that I sewed when we were making our straight stitches didn't go all the way to the very edge, but when you open it, you can see that this makes a nice, like, you can kind of backwards visualize, maybe not, but it's okay that this doesn't go all the way to the edge. If I really wanted to be picky, I could now go back in and sew that to the very edge if I really wanted to, but we're gonna top stitch it and it will stay closed. It won't fall apart, is what I'm trying to say. There we go, another one. Another one. There we go. I was on it. There we go. Straight stitch. And last one. So all 4 corners, you will straight stitch. Is this making sense? Make sure you jot a comment, because sometimes things are make sense in my head, and I want to make sure they make sense in translation so that you can easily make these. Okay. All right, so this is what they look like with the little tails, right? The little sewn tails. So all I'm going to do is, you can use a straight edge if you really want to, or you can just carefully cut or use your rotary to get rid of these excess corners. If you're feeling like, oh my word, I don't know that I did it right, here's a little test. Cut one of the corners. Where's my, here, cut one of the corners. This is cool. This is one of those aha moments. Cut one of the corners and turn it right side out just to give it a quick test to see. And it's not ironed and it won't be perfectly flat, but you'll get the idea. See? You can see how it's, Oh, this one I haven't cut yet. That's why there's extra fabric there. Did I cut this one? I don't know, but there we go. You can see, and you can actually see my corner isn't perfect, but it's a nice 45-degree angle. It'll make you kind of feel like a rock star, a geometry rock star, I feel like, when you do this. So that's kind of like a test. And what I did in my very first, if you're apprehensive on exactly where to stitch this line, what you can do is stitch one of them, and you always can re-stitch over it and move the line in and move the line in if you absolutely have to. I found that just moving that 45-degree angle, not overlapping with the front fabric, is kind of the ticket. Did I do all 4? Hang on. 1, 2, 3, here we go. Last one, 4. Woof. There's a lot of strings right here. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta-da. So now, this is how quick this project is. It's taken us, what, 20 minutes? And that's with me really explaining everything. So now we will flip this right side out and push the corners out. And if you see that they're not perfect, you can go in and trim extra fabric off. You can adjust. I want to adjust one so you can see. Ooh, here's a good one. Yeah, maybe that's a good one to adjust. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I would adjust one. Here's I'm going to show you. So do you see how right here, and this might be tricky to see, how this, well, first of all, this seam is coming out just a tiny bit, but do you see how there's a little bit extra? If I try to lay this flat, there's a little bit extra fabric in this corner. That means I can move my seam inward a tiny bit. Maybe I'm confusing it by doing this, but I just want to show you how you can troubleshoot your problem. So I'm going to move this seam over by like a smidge, because I want to just get rid of that extra pucker, I guess would be the word I would use. Probably pucker. So I'm moving it over, I don't know, this is probably 1/8 of an inch. See, I just moved it over, and that can get rid of the pucker. Haha, there we go. See, now it lays way more flat. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense, that how you can troubleshoot it. All right, look how easy this is. Makes me want to sit down and just sew all day, turn on a good movie, and sew some awesome napkins. So poke your corners out. I use a pencil or a knitting needle or a crochet hook or a marker or a pin, or I don't know, there's a million ways you can just poke your corners out so that they're nice and flat. Trim any pieces of string you have, but see how right here, right, it's not ironed, so it's kind of pulling in weird spots, but this is the beginning of the finishing process. So I'm gonna get my iron quick, and I'm going to press this really flat, because sewing is, if you're a knitter, you know that blocking your patterns, blocking your stuff is like the thing that makes it look professional. Pressing makes it look professional. And I'm sure you've heard people talk about pressing versus ironing. Some people have a preference. Pressing means you're just literally pressing. And in this case, this is probably what you want to do. You don't necessarily need to go back and forth because our edges are already worked out. But once you press this nice and flat, you'll feel like you are the best sewer in the planet because it will look amazing. Sewist in the planet, I think is the word. Our last step is to top stitch. So if you're seeing little moments, like right here, I'm seeing a little moment where like this little stitch is coming, not necessarily undone, but I probably didn't anchor it well. It's okay. It's not gonna actually come undone because we'll top stitch right around the edge here. So speaking of top stitching, right here, where this opening is, that's our 3-inch-ish opening. What I try to do, and again, if you have a better tip for this, please pipe up in the comments because I would love to hear your thoughts. I want to try and make sure that this stays straight. So I kind of just like work, there we go. Lick your fingers if you have to, and you're gonna kind of wiggle this orange fabric, in my case, the floral fabric out so it matches and looks like it's kind of a seamless seam, that it's always been there. Although I didn't quite do that 100% right, but here, there we go. Because I want my pink binding fabric to be underneath so that when it sews, it's catching the binding fabric underneath and then the orange floral on top, if that makes sense. Because I want to stitch it completely closed in a straight line if possible. The corners to me are what are especially important for ironing to make sure that everything is nice and flat because that's what you don't want to, I was talking about washing your napkins, and that's what I don't want to kind of like roll or get like wonky. And honestly, if you look at this, you can see that this angle is a little bit, it's not quite 90 degrees. The other ones are pretty darn close to 90 degrees. My math eye that I have. Okay, it's probably good enough. I probably could iron that thing for a long time. I'm just gonna set my pressing mat off to the side. And then all I'm gonna do is top stitch, and you can choose, I did it both ways actually on some of these. You can top stitch on the, top stitching is technically, I believe, 1/8 of an inch or even smaller to the edge of something. That's what the term top stitch means. So you can top stitch that's closest to the edge of the inside of your fabric or the edge of the outside of your fabric. I don't know that it super matters. I always choose the inside just because I feel like that's what really works. In a perfect world, I would always choose a top stitch thread color that's like wacky and different because I really love seeing the top stitching on something, the finishing on something, just like how I love to see the quilting on a quilt, I think is really cool. So I'm just going to line this up. I'm going to anchor my stitch, so you can either do the backwards, forwards to anchor that top stitch, or I like to just, my machine has a button that goes up and down like 5 or 6 times. And then I'm just gonna slowly give myself that really close to the edge. It's not quite stitching in the ditch or stitching in that edge, but it's really darn close to it. It doesn't have to be perfect because you probably won't see it if you're using just like a simple fabric. When you get to your edge, don't cut your fabric, keep your needle down, lift your foot and pivot the whole piece of fabric. And then keep going straight. I love after I've ironed this because I feel like it's kind of no nonsense stitching. You really can't go wrong here. Get to the edge, leave your needle down, lift up your foot so you can pivot. This is where sewing is so satisfying. You see such accomplishment, I think anyway. Pivot. Oh, I'm gonna go like one stitch further. There we go, pivot. And this is my last side. So when I get back up to the top, I just wanna anchor that stitch one more time. Top stitching is really just a finishing stitch, but I don't want it to ever come undone because then it will separate the two layers of fabric and I don't want that. Ta-da! So literally that simple, that easy. And you can see, I haven't trimmed this little like excess right here, but you can see you have a nice square edge, which this would be 12 by 12 in size, just the same size as our first cut that we made, and then, or a little bit smaller, I guess, because our finished napkin is 14 by 14, I believe, if my math is right. Yeah, well, like 13 and a half to 14, just depending on what your seam allowance is. So if you're trying to aim for a finished napkin size, it will be 1 inch bigger than the size that you cut your inside. I hope I didn't just confuse you with saying that. So yeah, my last step now is just to trim all of these extra threads, which I only have my rotary cutter. I don't have my scissors nearby, but that's okay. I'm just gonna trim up these little pieces. And if you want to, you can throw your napkins in the wash to start with if you haven't washed your fabric. I don't mind, but maybe that is something you want to choose to do. And then fold this up and voila. So I do have to tell you that the pattern at the very top says, at the very top right here, talks about having a pom-pom tie. Well, I'm just gonna be fully transparent. I forgot my pom-poms at home today. But my thought was if you wanted to use these for spring or a spring gathering or maybe Mother's Day or an Easter brunch or something, that when you tied this up with a nice little pom-pom, it looked very Eastery and spring and summery because little balls of fluff are very happy and wonderful for this time of the year. So I hope this has inspired you. I'm gonna check the comments one more time just to make sure I'm not missing anything. But hopefully everything is very kind of detailed in this PDF that you can download with the link in the description so that you can make some of your own napkins. Thanks so much for joining us. This was so fun. And I hope that I've inspired you to make some spring projects and especially these fabric napkins.